All right, everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going deep on Palantir. You know, that data analytics and software company, really making a name for themselves, especially with all this AI stuff going on.
Yeah, definitely a company to watch.
We've got their Q4 2024 business update and then their SEC Form 8K filing. That one has their official press release. So we're going to see how they wrapped up 2024. Should be pretty interesting.
Absolutely. Let's dive in.
So right off the bat, their performance in the U.S. market is, well, it's kind of amazing. 52% growth year over year for their U.S. revenue ends up at $558 million.
Yeah, and it's not just, government contracts, although, those are doing great too. But their U.S. commercial revenue, that's where it gets really interesting, right? Huge, 64% to hit $214 million.
And these aren't like small deals they're making either. I mean, $803 million in new U.S. commercial contracts. That's a record for them.
Wow, that's impressive.
And, their CEO, Alex Karp, he keeps saying Palantir is at the center of the AI revolution. I mean, with numbers like these, especially in the commercial sector, maybe he's right.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are starting to take notice. It seems like companies are really adopting their AI platform, AIP.
For sure. Okay, so let's step back for a second and look at the overall revenue growth, not just the U.S.
Right, good point. So overall, it's up 36% year over year.
Okay, still really good.
Oh yeah, for sure. Ends up at 828 million for the quarter.
Not too shabby at all.
But here's the thing, if you take out some of their strategic commercial contracts, that growth number, it actually jumps to 39%.
Interesting. What do you think that means?
Well, it could mean that they're focusing more on, bigger deals, maybe more impactful projects, perhaps with larger companies or organizations.
Makes sense. And it's not just about percentages, right? I mean, their customer base is growing like crazy too.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
43% year over year.
Wow.
They ended up with, get this, 711 customers.
7-Eleven. That's a lot of organizations using Palantir. But, the big question, I think, the question everyone wants to know is, are they making money from all this growth?
The million-dollar question,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Well, it's not just growth, they're actually turning that growth into profit.
Yeah.
And it's serious profitability. Their adjusted free cash flow for the quarter was a whopping $517 million.
Whoa. Okay. And what does that mean exactly? Like for people who don't follow all the financial stuff.
Yeah, so basically it means they have $517 million in cash flow
Right.
beyond what they're spending to keep the business running. That's a 63% margin.
So not just hype. They're building a real solid, profitable business.
Exactly. It's a big deal.
For sure, especially for, investors.
Right. That kind of free cash flow, it's a good sign for investors. It gives the company flexibility. They can reinvest it back into the business, maybe into research and development, new acquisitions, or even give it back to shareholders.
Yeah. And in an industry like AI, which is moving so fast, that financial strength is a huge advantage.
Huge.
So beyond free cash flow, their adjusted operating income, that was $373 million, so a 45% margin. And their GAAP net income and earnings per share, those were a bit lower, but that was mostly because of a one-time expense, right?
Yeah, one-time expense related to stock-based compensation, specifically their market vesting SARS payout.
Right, right. So sometimes you got to look beyond those GAAP numbers when there's a one-time thing like that.
Exactly. Those non-GAAP figures give you a better picture of how the business is actually performing, even with that big stock compensation payout.
Okay, so we know they're doing great right now, but what about the future? What do they see happening?
Well, they're projecting revenue to be between $3.741 and $3.757 billion for FY 2025. That's at least 31% growth compared to 2024.
Wow, that's a pretty big jump.
It is.
A lot more than a lot of analysts were expecting. So, I mean, what does that tell us? That they're really confident?
I think it shows they see a lot of potential for their technology, especially in the U.S. commercial sector. They project that revenue to be over $1.079 billion.
So more than double their U.S. commercial revenue in just 1 year. That's a bold prediction.
It is. At least 54% growth.
Wow. It's amazing how much they're betting on data-driven solutions.
Yeah, and it's not just about the revenue growth, right?
Yeah.
Their projected adjusted free cash flow guidance is between 1.5 and $1.7 billion. That means they're planning to keep that high level of profitability as they grow.
That's not easy to do, especially in a field like AI. It changes so quickly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's pretty rare to see a company with that kind of financial strength.
Okay, so the financials are clearly great, but what about their impact? Beyond just the numbers. In their business update, they mentioned some interesting real-world uses of their technology.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like Anduril, their defense tech company, and they use Palantir to be 200 times more efficient at predicting supply shortages.
200 times. That's incredible. I mean, that kind of insight, that can really change things.
For sure, it can have a huge impact. And it's not just defense either. The Cleveland Clinic, they're using AIP to make their operations smoother.
Interesting.
And they saw some really positive results. Like patient transfers went up by 7.6%, and the wait time in the ER went down by 38 minutes.
Wow, so they're actually making a difference in people's lives.
Right. Palantir is not just analyzing data, they're reshaping how entire industries work. From healthcare to supply chains, they're making things more efficient.
It's true. And then there's Rio Tinto. They're a global mining company,
Yeah.
and they're using Palantir to manage like dozens of unmanned trains. They run T 24/7.
That's a huge operation to manage.
I know, right? It's crazy to think about. But it just goes to show, how far Palantir's reach is and how much potential their technology has. It can be used in so many different areas.
It really is. They're not just crunching numbers, they're like building the foundation for a whole data-driven world.
So we've got these impressive financials, real-world impact, and ambitious plans for the future.
What a story.
Yeah.
Right.
So where do we go from here?
One thing that I thought was really interesting was their focus on developers.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, like their Warp Speed cohort and that DevCon 1 event, it seems like that's a big part of their strategy moving forward.
Yeah, it's like they're not just building AI tools, right? It's more like they're creating this whole ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. By like empowering developers to build on their platforms, it's like fostering a whole community of AI builders.
Smart.
I think so, yeah.
It's not just selling software. It's almost like creating a movement. Kind of reminds me of how Apple did it with the iPhone,
Yeah.
They made that whole app ecosystem, and it was like a huge part of their success.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. By letting others build on their tech, Palantir can tap into a way bigger network of talent and creativity.
Mm.
I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll lead to applications they hadn't even thought of.
And from a business point of view, it creates a more, I guess, a stickier ecosystem,
Yeah.
The more developers are invested in Palantir's platforms, the more those platforms become, well, essential, both for Palantir and their customers.
It's a win-win.
For sure.
But, we've talked a lot about the U.S., but I'm curious about what they're doing internationally. The update didn't really get into that too much.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, the U.S. is definitely their main focus, but they have been making some moves internationally, especially in Europe and Asia. They've got some contracts with governments and businesses over there. But for now, it seems like they're really focusing on, dominating the U.S. market.
Makes sense to really double down on what's working.
Yeah, absolutely. But, data and AI, they're global. So I wonder how their international strategy will change, over the next few years. Think they'll go for a more global presence eventually. It's hard to say. But they're ambitious, and their technology is so powerful, so I wouldn't be surprised. I could see them becoming a real global force in AI and data analytics. But for now, it's U.S. all the way.
Okay, makes sense.
They really seem laser focused on the U.S.
Speaking of focus, I mean, their guidance for FY 2025, it's really strong.
Yeah.
But, we can't forget about the bigger picture, right? The macro stuff, like inflation, interest rates, all that.
Wow.
Even the best companies can get thrown off course.
You're right. Well, what kind of headwinds do you see coming up?
Well, their performance is outstanding, no question. But we got to remember things like inflation, rising interest rates, even geopolitical instability, that can impact their growth, especially in the commercial sector. That tends to be more sensitive when the economy dips.
True, yeah. Businesses, they tend to cut back on spending when times are tough. And that could mean smaller budgets for data analytics, even if it's something as powerful as Palantir. But I do think, though, that their focus on those mission-critical solutions, especially for the government and defense, it might actually protect them a bit.
Protect them.
Yeah. Even when budgets are tight, government's still got to prioritize things like national security and public safety.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
And, they've got such a strong relationship with government agencies. I think that could give them a real advantage when it comes to winning new contracts.
Yeah, for sure.
Even in a tougher economy.
Right.
And they have a great track record, right? They get results.
Yeah.
And that builds trust, especially in those high-stakes situations where you really, you absolutely need things to work.
Absolutely. Their reputation is solid. That counts for a lot.
A lot.
So it sounds like they're well positioned to handle, any economic uncertainty that might be coming,
Right.
but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Oh, for sure.
Okay, so we've talked about their success, but what about the competition? The world of data analytics and AI, it's crowded.
It's a jungle out there.
Yeah. We've got these big tech giants and then all these ambitious startups. Where does Palantir fit in?
Right. So on the enterprise side, you've got giants like, Microsoft, Amazon, Google. They all have these powerful data analytics and AI platforms.
Yeah, and they've got tons of resources.
Huge resources and reach. But what sets Palantir apart, I think, is their focus.
Yeah.
They're going after these complex, mission-critical problems.
Mm.
And they have real deep expertise in areas like, national security and intelligence.
So I guess it's kind of like David versus Goliath.
Yeah.
They're not trying to be everything to everybody. They've found this niche where their specialized skills and experience give them an edge.
Right. They're not building the next, viral app or whatever. They're focused on solving some of the toughest problems facing governments and organizations. And they do it with a level of, sophistication and expertise that's really hard to match.
But what about the startups? Any of them, posing a threat?
There are always new players coming in with new ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But Palantir, they have a massive head start.
Yeah.
In terms of their technology, experience, the relationships they've built with customers. They've spent years building these platforms and honing their skills. It's like they've built this fortress around their core business.
So it's going to take a lot to break through.
It is, yeah. But, that doesn't mean they can just relax.
Right.
Tech changes so fast, they have to keep innovating to stay ahead.
Yeah, complacency is dangerous, especially in tech.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They've got to keep pushing the boundaries, keep figuring out what's possible with data analytics and AI. And they can't forget about their customers. Their needs are constantly changing, too.
Right. So, given how competitive it is, what do you think the future holds? Can they keep this going and really become a leader?
I mean, who knows, right?
Yeah.
It's tech. It's so unpredictable. But if I had to guess, just based on what we're seeing now, their focus, their adaptability, I think they're in a pretty good spot to keep succeeding.
But there are always things outside their control, right? Like what if some crazy new technology comes along and changes everything?
Of course. There could be some, black swan event or some major geopolitical shift or even a totally new tech breakthrough. That's part of what makes this industry so exciting, though, right?
Yeah,
It's always changing. The companies that can adapt, the ones that can innovate, those are the ones that will do well.
Yeah, high stakes game. And so far, Palantir's playing it well.
They are.
So we've covered their financials, the real-world impact, the challenges, and the competitive landscape.
Yeah, their strengths, their vulnerabilities. We've even thought about their long-term prospects. This has been a really interesting deep dive.
It has. But before we wrap things up, there's one more thing I wanted to bring up. So as I was reading through all this, what really struck me was Palantir's emphasis on the long game, like their long-term vision.
Yeah, I see that too. It's not about, quick wins or following the latest trends. They're trying to build a company that's going to last, like for decades. Exactly.
It's pretty remarkable, actually. Their belief in, the power of software to really transform things, especially when it comes to government and defense.
Yeah.
They really see data, data-driven decisions as being crucial for national security in the future, and they're putting themselves in a position to, to be the leader in that space.
It's so different from most tech companies. It's like they're playing a different game, not trying to make the next viral app or cash in on some, passing fad.
Right.
They're going after these really complex, really important problems that governments and institutions have to deal with.
And that takes a different kind of mindset, right? You need patience, resilience, a willingness to invest heavily in R&D, even if you don't see the results right away.
They're definitely playing the long game, and it's working. Their relationships with the government agencies are strong. They've got all this expertise in cutting-edge stuff like AI and machine learning, and they're building this, thriving developer ecosystem. It seems like they're ready for whatever's coming next. It does, yeah. And their company culture is interesting too. I've heard they're really selective about who they hire.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they're not just looking for technical skills. They want people who share their values, their mission. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I've heard that their interviews are pretty intense.
Yeah.
And they really emphasize intellectual rigor. It's like they're building a team of, philosopher kings.
Yeah.
Not just coding, but thinking deeply about the ethics of their work, all that.
And you can see that intellectual depth in their products
Mm.
and how they approach problems.
Hmm.
It's not just about creating tools, it's about creating frameworks for understanding, really complicated systems and making better decisions.
It's like they're a think tank that also builds, incredibly powerful software.
Haha. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Mm.
It's this mix of, cutting edge tech and deep intellectual curiosity. That's what makes them so unique.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Palantir, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember about this company?
I think the biggest thing is that Palantir is doing things differently. They're challenging how things are usually done, pushing the limits of technology, and they're building a company that's both profitable and driven by a real sense of mission.
Yeah, they're not your average Silicon Valley startup. They're doing things their own way, and it's definitely a story worth paying attention to.
Absolutely. And for anyone who wants to learn more, dig a little deeper, we definitely recommend checking out the sources we talked about today. The Q4 2024 business update. You can find that at https://investors.palantir.com/financials quarterly-results. And then their SEC Form 8K filing. That's at https://investors.palantir.com/sec-filings. Those documents, they've got a ton of information about Palantir, their business, their technology, and their vision for the future.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Palantir. We hope you enjoyed it. And maybe, it even got you thinking a bit.
And remember, the best deep dives are the ones you take yourself. So keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep learning.
This has been The Deep Dive, signing off.